Wow. This is wonderful. One thing that's good about being in community is that we're allowed to make mistakes together, allowed to forgive one another, allowed to be friends. And I've heard one definition of a friend as someone who knows all about you and likes you anyway. And so that's pretty much what my sermon is about today. Some of the times where I just wasn't the person I am today, and knowing the person I am today is still not the person I want to be. One of the questions that was asked at yesterday's anti-racism workshop, the White Caucus, where we got together and talked about what it was like growing up white, was, what was my first encounter with a non-white? Now, this might seem strange to some of our kids today, that this is even something that you would even notice, because, I mean, how many of you kids go to school with someone who is of a different race? If you are black or Hispanic or white, that there's someone else who's something different, just part of your class. I grew up way up north where hardly anybody lived, because it was very cold. And the few people that lived there were mostly Polish and German. Came from the northern parts of Europe where they were used to the cold. And I don't remember my first encounter with someone who was non-white, but it became the stuff of family legend. It was about 1962 or 3, and I was 2 or 3 years old. And my mother and her bowling team, and all their lack of wisdom, for Halloween, dressed up as an integrated family, meaning that one person dressed as an Indian, one person dressed as a Chinese person, one dressed as a Mexican, and my mother put on blackface. Now, we owned a grocery store that was up on the highway, a bit away from town. And so that if there was a black person who was traveling through northern Michigan, perhaps on their way to Canada, they would probably stop at our store because we were the only place for gas for at least 30 miles in either direction. And this lady came into the store, and I was 2, 3 years old, just kind of toddling around the store, and I saw this lady, and I ran my finger down the back of her leg and said, "It doesn't come off." My father reports that he was very grateful indeed that the lady just laughed. Because there just weren't black people where I was when I grew up. Now, the only minority in our area, there was a Native American family called the Stone. Their last name was Stone. And in contrast to my present situation, I was the darkest person in my family. Everybody was a fairer complexion than me. And my middle sister used to tease me and say, "Mom found you out by the dumps. You know, the Stones had too many children, and they left you by the side of the road, and Mom had pity on you." The type of story that only a big sister can tell a little brother. And so there was that odd thing of knowing that we were different, and it was just assumed somewhat better than the Stone family, even though we made a lot of money because we sold them a lot of beer. And And we were all part of that. We drank a lot in our family as well. So the black people that I knew growing up was Julia and her son Corey on a TV show where she was a nurse. I liked that show. We had some Bill Cosby records, and we watched Flip Wilson, and then there was Louis Armstrong. And I remember I used to do a Louis Armstrong imitation and sing Hello, Dolly. And I'd also sometimes would dress as Geraldine, and I was part of the family comedian saying, the devil made me wear this dress. And I was the only kid in my high school who listened to Billy Preston, and nobody understood why I liked this music. And my friend Andre came over and said, look, this is what you should be listening to. It's Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run. Listen to this. And I listened to that and said, well, 10th Avenue Freeze-Out's pretty funky. And so it's just kind of odd in my little area. And my sister went off to college. And a couple times she came home for the weekends, and she brought home some black men that she was dating. To which my mother responded mostly by buying lots and lots of books that filled our library. And then, occasionally growing up, black people would come into the store, and the lesson my dad told me was, don't stare. And because it was the thing that you wanted to do, it was like if someone came in, it was as odd to me as if someone came in with a third arm. You know, you would just... And it was just an odd thing because it was so rare. And to get an idea of how rare and how just uninformed of actual contact with black people was when my sister graduated from college, we went to the sand dunes up in Michigan, which are up on the Lake Michigan shoreline. It's a beautiful place to visit. And we're climbing up the sand dunes, and there's a couple black teenagers on the sand dunes. And one guy jumps on the other guy's back, and I say to my sister, look, the bottom of his feet are white. Which point my sister put her hand over my mouth and dragged me across that sand dune. And at my college, there were 12 black people at the college. 6 of them were foreign students from Africa. And so there wasn't really much exposure there. My first real exposure was when I came to work in Chicago for a group called Little Brothers of the Poor. And I worked on the south side, and that's where I met Gail, where she was the volunteer coordinator for that. And it was odd because I knew I was going into rough neighborhoods. But I knew that I didn't have a clue of really how to tell what was going on. So I just was bold in my ignorance. But there's one neighborhood in Chicago, which is a white enclave called Bridgeport, which is intentionally white. And I could tell when I went to Bridgeport, these white people were mean. So I was most afraid when I went to Bridgeport. And then I had a coworker who was black, and she just graduated from college. She was from Dayton, Ohio, and she moved to Chicago. And she was the other intern that worked on the south side. And she hated it. And I couldn't understand why, because it really wasn't that bad. But what I didn't realize was that she grew up wealthier than me, and for her, as a college-educated person, to be stuck back in the ghetto, or in a ghetto that she had no experience with, was just as jarring. And it was more jarring for her because all the people in Chicago thought that she should know what's going on, but she's Dayton, Ohio. She's not the south side of Chicago. And I said, well, those neighborhoods aren't so bad. And she goes, well, they're not going to bother you. You're a freak. And you know, that people who have noticed how I dress and comment on my hair as a minister when I had no such restrictions on my personal appearance. You can only imagine. Well, eventually, Gail and I fell in love, and we were going to visit a couple that I went to seminary with, a guy who eventually did our wedding. And we were driving down about Maryville, Indiana, about where Oprah lives. She hadn't moved into the neighborhood yet. And we were driving, and this car pulls up, passes us, and is in front of us. Or I'm coming up, and they stop in front of me. So I start to pass, and then they start to turn into me, and I hear them yelling, "Nigger lover." And I realize these people are chasing me. And all that time that I wasted in my high school years driving my car incorrectly, and because when I was in high school, there was also a TV show called Streets of San Francisco, which was all about car chases, and we used to play Streets of San Francisco when we were bad children, abusing our privilege to drive. But Gail will tell you that there's a good skill to learn of being able to do a donut on a fly and spin around the car and do all those skidding. Because we spent about 15 minutes running from these people. And then another incident in my life that many of you are familiar with, my refusal for the past few years to sign marriage licenses. In the sense, until marriage is available to all people, both gay and straight, that I ask people to do a civil ceremony for their legal marriage, and I do a religious ceremony for their marriage with their family in the gathering. Well, I had a kind of accidental situation where I had to do that myself, because I had just gotten a job in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and Gail was commuting from Kenosha to Chicago, which is the last stop on the line. So she'd leave at 6 in the morning and get back at 7, 8 at night. And I had 2 black children to enroll into school, and we were so poor that Gail really couldn't take a day off. And so we got married a month earlier than planned, purely for economic reasons, so I could enroll these kids in school, because my son was 15, 16, a little bit taller than me with a mustache, and actually did look older than me, because one time he had left a history book over at a friend's house, and so I drove him over there to pick up the history book, and a parent comes to the door, and the kid said, "Do you kids know what time this is? Why are you coming at 9:30 at night?" I said, "John, I'll wait in the car." And I remember when we were moving to Kenosha, I said, "Can I have my book deposit back? I'm the kid's parent. I put this check in." And they said, "We're going to mail it to you." And I just started thinking, why am I being treated this way? It's just, you go in, you get your book, they have the check in a drawer. And I said, did they think my son was so stupid that he would find a white man who looked younger than him to pretend he was his father? And then in the marriage itself, there's just been these moments of an inside view. I have more knowledge of lotion and hair care products than a person should have. and just odd incidents where once we were having fish sticks and I poured a glass of milk, my whole family just kind of reacted like, "What are you doing?" And they grew up that you never eat milk and fish together. You just don't. And I read years later that the lactose intolerance is higher in African Americans, and also fish exacerbates it. But they had just grown up with this legend, in their folk legend in their family, that if you're eating fish, you don't pour a glass of milk. And it was so odd. I poured this glass of milk, and my whole family went, and they were waiting for me to get sick on the table. And then probably the biggest adjustment for me, other than explaining to Gail that that's a bruise, no, it doesn't hurt, it happens all the time, was just, I would tell my family to stop arguing. And they would look at me and say, we're not arguing. Because they were talking loud, and they were this whole intense play fighting that just wasn't. When people in my family were talking that loud, they were arguing. And my wife and her kids just looked at me and said, how come he always thinks we're fighting? And so I had this multicultural experience, and so in some ways I thought I was kind of done, I committed something that used to be a crime in many states. And then I started learning. I went to my first anti-racist training when we were at the church in Kenosha, probably around 1990-ish. And realized that multiculturalism and anti-racism are two different things. Multiculturalism is acceptance, learning, all those things that we were raising our hands about. Cultural awareness, politeness. But anti-racism goes deeper. It's about advocating for a change. Did I ever think about why the Stone family lived by the dumps? It never crossed my mind. But I imagine they lived by the dumps because that was the only place in town they were allowed to live. But I had no awareness of that. And even though my family had taught me to be polite to the Stone family, even though we talked about them behind their back, when they were in the store, we were always polite. That was the difference between multiculturalism and anti-racism. Of saying, we can be polite to people. We can get along. And when I think of Rodney King's speech during the riot, can we just get along? That's multiculturalism. Just getting along. But saying, what type of system is it that allows somebody to be beaten on videotape and people to somehow feel that that was okay and looking for ways to justify it? And I know that decision came down on my son's first birthday. And that was just rough. And that's where anti-racism comes in as a spiritual practice. Because we're not a denomination that talks about confronting evil. We generally tend to have a positive view of things. Universalism, all are saved, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And we just sometimes think that we'll just overcome evil with good. But anti-racism says we are living in the midst of an evil. There's nowhere in our society where the story isn't partially or even wholly about racism. between the genocide of Native Americans and slavery and all the rules that kept people apart for so many years, and the rules that remain unwritten. When I think of UU conversations about whether to clap in service. Is the service to be like the symphony or a tent revival? We swing from somewhere in between, going back and forth at times. But that's the struggle of trying to figure out, what do we do next? Because every choice that we make comes with all the lessons we have learned and the lessons that we may have to unlearn and the things that we are blind to. So none of us are done. None of us ever will be done. Our children who are here today will probably have to be working with their children to undo some of this stuff. Because, as I said a few weeks ago, it's not the race card. The whole table and the ground that it's sitting on in this country has to do with race. And so, in the spirit of forgiveness and just working together and having mercy for each other, I would like us to go into these conversations. The anti-racist weekend is over, but I'm happy about that. But I know there's still a lot more work to do, a lot more conversation. And it involves conversations that are sometimes embarrassing and sometimes ignorant. You know, to be able to stand up and say, at one time in my life I was so ignorant that I didn't know the bottom of black people's feet weren't black. We all have these ignorances, and so when we're into these conversations with each other across racial and cultural and economic lines, we'll probably say some really stupid things. And we will sometimes say that we're angry and then be made to feel like we're not a good sport for being so angry. This is some pretty raw stuff. But I think this congregation is ready for this conversation because I've seen us forgive each other for a lot of things. In the 8 years I've been here, I've heard some outrageous things. I've seen some behavior, and I've said and had some of those behaviors myself. But it's in that spirit of mercy and trust that we can move forward and become better than we are. So if anybody else wants to share a story, let's see if this, or an idea, or a thought, I open the floor to you. I think is this working? Okay, I'm talking now? Okay.
Thank you. Hi, can you hear me? My name's Ellen Gelbin, and I was raised Unitarian by my parents. And I also was raised in the North, and so my contact with black people was minimal to nothing. And when we moved down here to Raleigh, it was 1973, and I was 13 years old. I didn't realize we were the same age. And I went to Ligon Junior High School in Raleigh, and for the first time had contact with a true multiracial experience. And I made friends. And one day, I was walking down the sidewalk, and a black friend of mine and her boyfriend were walking the opposite direction, and I said hello to her. And as they passed, I heard him say to her, "You know you're not supposed to talk to those kind of people." And I went home and I told my parents, and they tried to explain to me some of the history so that I could feel better about myself, because it made me feel terrible, and I didn't know what to do. A couple months later, I had a terrible incident happen in the cafeteria line, and I came home and I said to my father, a black girl pulled a knife on me in the cafeteria line. And my father said, was it necessary to the story to say that she was black? Not, oh my God, somebody pulled a knife on you? Are you okay? And so that's the way I was raised. Now, I'm going to tell a story on myself because it's something I'm ashamed of. When I joined this fellowship, it was the first time we had just finished with a minister, Buck Looney, and we were looking for an interim minister. And in my heart of hearts, I was hoping that he would be a black minister, or she would be a white minister, a woman, or she would be handicapped, or she would be something other than an old white man. And here comes George Briggs. George, stand up for me, please. And at first I was very upset. But George Briggs, I love. He is interesting. He is interested. He is open. He is welcoming. He is understanding. He is a lifelong learner. And I fell in love with him, and it taught me that while my life is inclusive and welcoming to all who are different from me, it is not a good thing to have prejudices against my own kind. And I need to keep an open mind, even for the older white men that I know.
I'm going to shave the gray in my beard.
Hello. Okay. I just wanted to share a quick story. I think a couple of weeks ago there was a statement about not seeing a difference between black and white people, and how it's not something that we should ignore. It's something that we should embrace, and that it's not something that we should be colorblind to. And I think that was such a great statement. It made me think the rest of since then I've been thinking about it. In that light, I want to say that we talk a lot about how much more work there is to be done on this issue, but sometimes we forget how much work has been done. And I would like to say something about that. I work at Winston-Salem State, which is a traditionally black school, and I grew up on a tobacco farm in the South, and my dad is racist, and I grew up in that family, and I feel like coming from that setting and now working at a black school and having, I interact with black people all day, and I have black friends, and I realize that they're black, and I just think it's so great. I think it's great that there's so many different people out there, and that we can all live together and enjoy that difference and that experience. And so I think that we've come a long way from where this country started, and we should rejoice.
Yes. I'll work my way around this way.
I'm a little older than Travis, but I also grew up on a tobacco farm. And we literally, my brothers and I, did call the elderly black couple that looked after us when my parents were out of town Aunt Sophie and Uncle Walter. And I am pleased that we have come so far from that kind of degradation to other people. And I was in the shower last night, and I looked down at my white skin, and I thought of my niece who comes from a mixed parentage, and of your son who is of mixed parentage. And I wonder why we even have to have a racial designation. Is a child who's 50% black, 50% white, is he not just as much one as the other? Why can't we just do away with it?
And that is a very hard question, because biologically, race just doesn't stand up as a category. But nevertheless, racism is real. And so it's a real concept about a false biological category.
I'm a native of Winston-Salem, grew up here, and from junior high on through into high school, there was a black community with the school, and we all got along wonderfully until busing started. Until what? Busing started. And when the busing started, the people that I was friends with would not associate with us anymore. And it was just a strange phenomena to see people that I'd known all my life and had called my friends that suddenly weren't talking to me anymore. And one of them even hit me in a parking lot after a ball game one night, and it really was a dumbfounding experience here in Winston-Salem to go through that. But we've worked through it all.
Mm-hmm.
Pay attention.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I like the idea of us
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I like the notion of us dealing with difficult and sensitive issues with a sense of humor. First of all, white men can jump. And my father told me years ago when I was just a kid myself, we were talking about the difference in races. And my father told me, well, just look at it like they have a better suntan than we do. One of my roommates in college at Florida State was black, and he used to tease us, the rest of us, that, gee, all we do is go to the beach is put our hands up. and so I like that sense of humor. We can all laugh at each other and love one another.
It's all part of the...
Last August, my daughter and I were in the Grand Canyon, and amongst a group of tourists who were perhaps Japanese, I'm not sure, but there were probably 40 of them and the two of us African Americans in our group. And they didn't speak English, and their attempts to communicate led me to think that they needed me to hold their camera and take pictures of them. And so I took a few pictures, but what it ultimately turned out to be is that they had never seen African American people before. And so for about 20 minutes, we were like museum exhibits as they formed a line and took pictures with us. And then, in their ignorant boldness, touched my arm, and one of the gentlemen remarked, "Strong."
You have to be strong to put up with that.
Hi, I'm Pat Jolin. Real quick, I grew up in Westport, Connecticut. I don't know if you all know where that is, but it's a very affluent, very liberal suburb of New York City. And I graduated in '64, which of course was a very turbulent time for America. And we were just so very proud that we had one black family in town, and he was president of my senior class. And that was just so cool because we were so liberal and so non-racist. And I didn't really understand race relations till I moved down here, and that was wonderful. And I realized the other day, it was funny, that I have breakfast every morning with about 5 black people who are all Southern Baptist. And I just love it. We have a great time. So it's been a big change for me and a really welcome one.
Hi, my name's Rami Wingo, and this is an idea more than a story, because I think I want to continue what we're doing this weekend, and my contribution to that is I have access to a film called The Color of Fear, and I'd like to see by a show of hands how many people have seen that or heard of it. Okay, it's wonderful. I've seen it twice. It is due facilitation and discussion afterwards, to not just watch it in isolation, and I would be very honored to be part of the facilitation team. And I would like to present this sometime in March. So I'm working with Charlie and Jamie and others to try to make this happen. And the 2 times that I've seen it, both times has brought me to tears, and it's worth watching many times. So I hope I can be part of bringing that here.
During my active academic career throughout the country, one of the best general internists I met was an African American man in Detroit. And I'll never forget that. I can still see him in my mind's eye. What a great person he was. And it has nothing to do with whether he was African American or anything else. He was just brilliant, and he did great work.
Let us continue this conversation, and we'll have lots of opportunities. Oh, you're not going to let me out.
I want you to tell them what your grandmother said when she found out about us. Because I thought that was wonderful. So
Yeah. My grandmother was born in 1900, which is the copyright date on a very scary book back there called The Negro, the Beast, Not in the Image of God, a pseudo-scientific thing about black people not being human. And she told my sisters when I said, well, I'm bringing up my fiance to meet the family, she says, I know I shouldn't feel upset, but I do. And of course, when she met, she was nothing but cordial. But it was just that awareness of the intellect and the emotion don't always.
it's just like a man who totally forgot the story.
Stand up, have a fight.
She said she was ashamed and uncomfortable about the way she felt, but she would think on it. When we came up to visit, now I had young children, I had children already, told you about the teenage stories. When my daughter came into the kitchen, she was sitting in the chair, and I had told them to say, Mrs. Burroughs, that was her name, and my daughter said, good morning, Mrs. Burroughs, and she said, why don't you call me Grandma like the other kids? And she didn't live very much longer after we got together, but during the time that she was around, I saw her respect that Charlie and I were good together. And I saw her accepting, as well as an elderly, sick woman could, that this change was coming in her family. And I respect that because I don't think it's easy. I just think it's worthwhile. And as she gave it, she really gave it that. And I appreciated that a lot.
Please rise as you are able and join in singing. Wow, it's 11:36.